My husband stood under the white garden arch we had spent a year planning, tapped the microphone twice so the whole party would go quiet, and instead of saying his vows to me, he slid a folded stack of divorce papers into my hands and waved a woman half my age up to stand beside him. "Everybody, I want you to meet Desiree," he said, smiling like a man cutting a ribbon. "And Ruthie, everything out there has my name on it. You'll leave with nothing, just like the day I met you." 180 guests, gold tablecloths, the church choir standing in their robes waiting to sing, and my own son sitting at the head table looking down at his plate like the answer to all of this was hidden somewhere in his mashed potatoes. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. What Cornelius did not know, what he could not have known because he never once sat still long enough to learn it, was that his own mother had seen this exact day coming 9 years before he did. She had seen it coming, and she had left me the one thing he could never take. It was sitting in a sealed carton at table 2 that very night, under the elbow of a quiet old man wearing a gray suit and a black bow tie, and my husband had walked right past it to hand me those papers. But I am getting ahead of myself, and this story deserves to be told in order, so you understand every thread of it. Before I take you back, do an old woman one small kindness. Tell me down below where you are watching from, and what time it is where you sit right now. I read every single comment that comes across this story, all of them, and it does my heart real good to know who is out there listening to me tonight and carry this one thing with you as we go. Because it is the whole of what I learned in 63 years of living. A man will tell you exactly who he thinks you are, and if you are wise, you will let him keep believing it until the day the truth stands up on its own 2 feet and speaks. Get yourself something warm to drink and settle in, because this is not a short story, and it does not want to be hurried. It is the story of 40 years of marriage, and of the 3 years inside those 40 that mattered more than all the rest put together. And I promise you, before we are through, you will watch a whole room of people who thought they knew exactly who I was find out, all at once, in front of one another, that they never knew me at all. You will hear the moment a very confident man's voice cracks straight down the middle. Stay for that. It was a long time coming, and so, it turned out, was I. My name is Ruthie Bell Carter. I was born in a low brick house on the red clay edge of Marietta, Georgia, the daughter of a woman who cleaned other people's kitchens by day and sang alto in the choir at Mount Pleasant by night. My mother taught me 2 things and drilled them into me until they were part of my bones. The first was that you feed people, whoever they are, whether they thank you or not, because a fed person is a person who remembers you. The second was that the Lord keeps a ledger no man can shred, and every kindness you do in the dark gets written into it. And one day, in His time and not yours, that ledger comes due. I believed her about the food long before I believed her about the ledger. It took me until I was 61 years old, standing in an ivory dress beneath that white arch, to learn she had been right about both. I met Cornelius Carter at a church fish fry when I was 19. He was 22, lean and sharp dressed even then, with a way of talking that made you feel like the future was a house he was building, and you had just been offered the best room in it. He was ambitious in a manner that felt like warmth back in those days. He talked about developments, about land, about putting his name on buildings you could see from the highway. I liked how he leaned forward when he spoke, like the whole world was leaning back, and he was the only one pushing against it. His mother was there at that fish fry too, and you must remember her, because she is the true heart of this whole story. Odessa Carter. A small, straight-backed woman in a hat she had trimmed herself, with hands that never stopped moving and eyes that never stopped watching. She took one look at me across a folding table full of catfish and hush puppies, and she said, loud enough for her son to hear, "That girl right there has kind hands. You watch those hands, son. A woman's hands will tell you everything her mouth won't." Cornelius laughed it off. He was always laughing off the things his mother said, right up until it was too late to laugh at them anymore. But I never forgot it. I do not think a girl ever forgets the first time an older woman looks at her and sees something worth naming out loud. We married under the steeple at Mount Pleasant when I was 20. Odessa stood in the front pew in a lavender dress and cried the whole way through, and afterward she took my 2 hands in her 2 hands and held them up between us like she was weighing them. "These," she said, "Ruthie, whatever happens in the long years, you keep these hands kind. Kindness looks like foolishness to fools. But God is not a fool, baby, and He keeps receipts." I could not fathom what she meant. I thought it was just a mother-in-law's way of blessing a marriage. I would not understand her, not truly, for another 40 years. I remember one evening early in our courtship, before the wedding, when Odessa had me over to shell peas on her back porch, just the 2 of us, and she talked to me the whole time in that low, steady voice of hers, and I have never forgotten a word of it. "My son is going to be somebody," she told me, running her thumb down a pod so the peas rattled into the bowl. "You mark it, he's got the fire in him." But fire's a funny thing, baby. It warms a house or it burns it down, and the only difference is who's tending it. "I'll tend it," I said, young and sure. "I know you will," she said. "That's what worries me." She looked at me over her glasses. "A man like my son will let a good woman do all the tending and then forget the house was ever cold. You understand what I'm saying to you? He'll take the warmth and call it his own doing." "Then I'll remind him," I said. Odessa laughed, but it was not an unkind laugh. "You won't," she said. "You're too soft to remind a man of a thing he doesn't want to remember." "That's not a fault, Ruthie. It's just the truth of you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remember it for you. I'm going to keep my own set of books on this family, and I'm going to write down every kindness you do right up here." She tapped her temple. "And one day, when it counts, I'm going to make sure the right people read them." "Read what?" I asked her. "Never you mind," she said, going back to her peas. "You just keep those hands kind and let an old woman keep her books." It sounded like just talk to me, old woman talk, the kind that comes with peas and a porch and a long evening. I had no notion I had just heard the entire plan of my own salvation, spoken plain, 9 years before I would understand a syllable of it, and 31 years before it would come true. My own mother pulled me aside at the reception, in the church basement over the punch bowl, and she took my chin in her hand and turned my face up to hers. "You happy, baby?" she asked me. "I'm so happy I could bust, Mama," I told her. "Good," she said. "Now hear me. Happy is a fine thing to start a marriage on, but happy don't pay a light bill, and happy don't sit up with a sick child, and happy surely don't stand between you and a man who decides one day he's bigger than his promises." She smoothed my collar. "You keep something of your own, you hear? A little money, a little kitchen, a little something with your name on it that's yours no matter what. Every woman needs one thing a man can't put his hand on. You promise me." "I promise, Mama," I said, though I hardly knew what I was promising. "That's my girl," she said. And she kissed my cheek and let me go back to my new husband, and I had no inkling of it then. But that punch bowl promise is the reason I bought a Robin's Egg van 2 years later and painted my own name on it in gold. My mother told me to keep one thing that was mine. His mother told me to keep my hands kind and let her keep the books. Between the 2 of them, those 2 women armed me for a war I could not see coming, and I walked into it thinking I was only getting married. We were poor at the start, the good kind of poor, the kind you can laugh about later. Cornelius worked concrete and I cooked. Lord, did I cook. I started catering out of our own kitchen, weddings and repasts and church anniversaries, and I bought myself a second-hand catering van the color of a robin's egg, and I lettered my very name on the side of it in gold letters. Ruthie's Table. That van was the first thing I ever owned outright that had my own name on it, and you keep that van in your mind, because it matters more later than you can imagine right now. The money I made from Ruthie's Table is what kept the lights on those first years while Cornelius chased his developments. When he needed a deposit on his first parcel of land, it was my catering money that made the deposit. When his first crew needed paying before the first draw came through, it was my catering money that paid them. He built his company on the back of a robin's egg van and a woman's kind hands, and for a while, in the early years, he even knew it. He would come in at night smelling of concrete dust and he would kiss the top of my head and say, "We're building something, Ruthie. You and me." We, in those days it was we. I do not know the exact year the we became an I. It did not happen all at once. It happened slow, like water wears down a stone, so slow you cannot see it moving, and then one day you look and there is a channel cut clean through the rock. By the time Carter Development had a real office with his name on a glass door, it was his company. By the time there was a photograph in the county paper, it was his hard hat and his shovel in the ground and a line under it that called him a self-made man. I read that line twice at my own kitchen table. Self-made. I did not say anything. I folded the paper, and I put it in a drawer. And that was the first time I taught my husband that he could write me out of the story, and I would help him fold the paper. I did that. I am not blaming a young husband for an old man's cruelty. I am telling you that I handed him the eraser myself, early, out of a love I mistook for humility. But this is not a story about a company or a van or a newspaper line, not really. This is the story of a mother, and about 3 years, and about a ledger that came due. So let me take you to the part that matters. Let me carry you to Odessa. It was 9 years before that vow renewal that Mother Odessa got her diagnosis. She was 78 then, still living in the big family house on Sweetwater Road, the house Cornelius had grown up in, the house he would one day stand in front of me and try to give away. The doctors used a lot of long words, but what it came down to was that her heart was failing slow and her mind was starting to slip its moorings, and she could not be left alone anymore. There was a family meeting about it, the kind of meeting where everyone talks about a person like she is already a problem instead of a mother. And at that meeting my husband said the sentence that I now believe was the true beginning of the end of him, though it would take 9 years to finish. "We'll put her somewhere nice," Cornelius said, tapping his pen on the table. "There's places for this. That's what they're for. I've got a development breaking ground. I can't be running to Sweetwater Road every day, and neither can Ruthie." I remember I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "I can," I said. He looked at me like I had spoken in another language. "You can what?" "I can run to Sweetwater Road every day," I said. "Somebody has to. And it isn't going to be a stranger in a building, not while I have 2 hands," he argued. Lord, did he argue. "You're not a nurse, Ruthie," he said. "You don't know the first thing about medications, about lifting a grown woman, about any of it. These places have trained staff. That's what they do all day. I know how to love her," I said. "The training comes second." "Love doesn't change a catheter," he said. And I remember the whole room went cold at the ugliness of it. And even his brother, who never said much, looked down at the table. "This is sentimental. This is you wanting to feel like a good person. I've got a development breaking ground in 6 weeks. I do not have time to be running out to Sweetwater Road and neither do you. I didn't ask you for your time, I said. I asked you for your blessing. There's a difference, and I notice you can't spare either one. That stopped him for a second. His brother spoke up then. Quiet. Cornelius, if Ruthie's willing to do it, why in the world would you fight her on it? It saves us all the cost. Mama gets to stay home. What's the argument? And my husband did not have a good answer, because the true answer was ugly, and even he could not say it out loud at a family table. So he threw up his hands. But you have to understand something about my husband. Cornelius did not fight me on this because he wanted his mother home. He fought me on it because a facility was a line item, a number he could write a check for and be done with, and a wife driving out there every day was an inconvenience he could not put on a spreadsheet. When he understood that I was not going to be moved, he did what he always did with a thing he could not control. He handed it to me and walked away and told himself he had solved it. Fine, he said. If you want to play nurse, play nurse. But don't come crying to me about how tired you are. I did not come crying to him. I did not come to him at all. For 3 years, I got up before the sun and I drove out to Sweetwater Road, and I let myself in with my own key, and I took care of the woman who had once held my 2 hands up between hers and called them kind. I want to tell you what those 3 years actually looked like, because this is the part the world never sees, the part that does not make the newspaper, the part that has no photograph and no shovel in the ground. It goes in the other ledger. I bathed her. When a body starts to fail, it loses its dignity in 100 small ways before it loses its life, and I learned every one of them. And I learned how to carry her through each one so she never once felt ashamed in front of me. I washed her hair in the kitchen sink with a plastic cup because she was afraid of the bathtub by then, and I would sing while I did it. She loved the old hymns. His Eye is on the Sparrow was her favorite, and I must have sung it to that woman 1,000 times, sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning when her mind would slip and she would wake up frightened, not knowing where she was or who I was. Who are you? She asked me once, deep in the small hours of the night, her hand gripping my wrist hard enough to bruise. I'm Ruthie, I told her. I'm the girl with the kind hands. Remember? You named them yourself. Ruthie, she said, testing it, frightened. I don't know a Ruthie. Where's my son? Where's Cornelius? I want my boy. He's coming, Mother Odessa. I lied. Soft. Because you do not tell a frightened old woman at that hour that her boy is not coming. He's on his way. Let me sing to you while we wait for him. Sing the Sparrow One, she whispered. My mama sang me the Sparrow One. And something in her old face would settle, and she would let me sing her back down to sleep. His eye is watching over the little sparrow, I would sing, low and slow, and I know he is watching me. By the time I got to watches me, she would be asleep again, and I would sit there in the dark holding a sleeping woman's hand, and I would think, nobody will ever know I did this. And I made my peace with that. I truly did. I did not do it to be seen. That is the part that matters. Remember that. Because a man is going to stand up under a garden arch and tell you I did everything for money. And I need you to already know the truth before he says it. I cooked her Sunday plates every single week. Smothered chicken, collards with a smoked turkey neck, cornbread in the black iron skillet that had been her mother's. Even at the end, when she could barely eat, she would take one bite of my collards and close her eyes and say, now that's a woman who was raised right. And I would feed her the rest one small forkful at a time, and we would talk, on the good days, about everything and nothing. The good days were a gift, and I hoarded them. On the good days, her mind came clear back to itself, and she was sharp as a tack, sharper than her son ever gave her credit for. She would sit propped up in her bed with a cup of coffee going cold on the nightstand, and she would tell me things. You know why I never remarried after his daddy passed? She said to me one afternoon, out of nowhere. You never said. Because I had a little money, she told me, and gave me a look, sly and proud. His daddy left me the house free and clear, and a life insurance check, and never spent a dime of it, Ruthie. I invested it. Little by little, 40 years, whatever I could put by from my seamstress work, I put it in the market, and I let it sit and told not a soul, not even my son. Especially not my son. She sipped her cold coffee and made a face. A woman with her own money doesn't have to remarry to eat. A woman with her own money can say no. You remember that? Yes, ma'am, I said, not thinking anything of it, wiping her chin. How much you think I've got put by all these years? She asked me, and there was mischief in it. I couldn't guess, Mother Odessa. More than my son thinks, she said, and laughed, a real laugh, the first one in days, a whole lot more than my son thinks. And he's never once asked. 40 years, and that boy has never once asked his mama what she's worth. He just assumes. Assuming is going to be the ruin of him one day, you watch. She patted my hand. But you never assumed a thing about me. You just showed up and washed my hair. God sees that. God's got it written down. I laughed and told her she was talking foolishness, and I took her cold coffee to warm it up, never grasping that I had just been told, plain as day, the exact size and shape of the thing that was going to save my life. She kept telling me. She never stopped telling me. I just never once listened close enough to hear it. It was on one of those good days, maybe 2 years into it, that she started talking about her son in a manner that stopped my heart and my chest. Let me set that scene for you proper, for it is the scene the whole story turns on, and I have carried it in my chest for 9 years. It was a Sunday. I had made her plate, and she had eaten more than usual, and her mind was clear and bright, and she was propped up against her pillows, looking out the window at the dogwood in the yard. He's not coming, is he? She said. It was not really a question. Cornelius had promised to come by that Sunday. He had promised the Sunday before, too. He had a site inspection. He always had a site inspection, and I had learned by then that the site inspections were as often as not just Desiree, the young business partner he had brought on, the one with the long car and the longer legs, though I did not let myself know that yet. I knew it like you know a storm is coming from the smell in the air before you will admit you had better bring in the wash. He's busy, Mother Odessa, I said. He loves you. He's just busy. Don't you lie to me, Ruthie Bell, she said, but gently. I'm dying, not stupid. My son isn't coming because a dying mother is a hard thing to look at, and my son has never in his life looked at a hard thing. He looks past it, to the next thing. Always has. She turned from the window and fixed me with those clear eyes. Sit down. I want to ask you something, and I want the truth. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Why do you do it? She asked me. You get up before the sun. You drive out here. You bathe me. You feed me. You sing to me when I wake up screaming and don't know my own name. My own son won't do it, and you're not even my blood. Why, Ruthie? Tell me true. Is it for the money? Is it because you think there's something in it for you at the end? And you have to understand, this was the moment. This was the test, though nobody told me it was a test. If I had said one wrong word, one word about money, one word about deserving something, I believe that Will would have read different, or not read at all. But none of that was in my head, so I just told her the plain truth. There's nothing in it for me, Mother Odessa, I said. There's never going to be anything in it for me, and I don't want anything. I do it because you took my 2 hands in yours at my wedding, and you called them kind before anybody in my life ever had. I do it so that somebody should sit with you in the night. I do it because it's right. That's the whole of it. There's no bottom under it, and no reason behind it but that. The old woman looked at me for a long, long time, and her eyes filled up, and she reached out and gathered both my hands in hers, just like she had at my wedding 40 years before, and she raised them up between us and looked at them. "Kind hands," she said, soft. I knew it the first day. I knew it at a fish fry over a plate of catfish. She squeezed them. "You just gave the right answer, baby, and you don't even know there was a question." God keeps receipts, Ruthie. I keep telling you, and you keep thinking I'm being an old church woman. I am not being an old church woman. I am telling you a fact about how the world is built. Everything you do in this house is written down, and one day, at the worst hour of your life, someone will rise up and read it back to a room of folks who thought you were nothing. You hold on for that day. You hear me? You hold on. "I hear you," I said, not understanding one word of what I was agreeing to. "No, you don't," she said, and she laughed, and lay back on her pillows, satisfied. "But you will." That was the good day. There were not many more of them after that. She studied me a long time. Her eyes were clear that day, clearer than they had been in weeks. "Baby," she said, "do you know why I named your hands the first day I met you? Because I had already looked at his, and his hands were always reaching for the next thing. Yours were the only hands in this family that ever stayed still long enough to hold something." She reached over and patted my knuckles. "God keeps receipts, Ruthie. You hear me? Everything you do in this house, somebody is writing it down. Not me. Somebody higher than me. You just keep on being kind, and you let me worry about the ledger. God keeps receipts." She said it to me 100 times over those 3 years, and every time I took it for just an old church woman saying, a comfort, she told herself. It never dawned on me that Odessa Carter meant it as a plan. It never crossed my mind that she was not talking about heaven. I was 1 step behind her the whole time, and I would stay 1 step behind her for 9 more years. Clear up to a night beneath a white garden arch, when a man in a gray suit stood up at table 2, and I finally understood what she had been telling me. I called my husband more than once during those 3 years, when she took a bad turn, when I thought the end might be close. Because a son deserves the chance to say goodbye whether he wants it or not. I remember one such call clear as glass. "Cornelius," I said, "you need to come. She's asking for you. She had a bad night, and the nurse thinks it could be soon. Please, come sit with your mother." "How soon is soon?" he said, and I could hear a meeting behind him. Voices. A speakerphone. "I don't know," I said. "Nobody knows. That's what soon means. Come now, baby, come tonight." "I can't come tonight," he said. "I've got the Atlanta people flying in tomorrow morning. This is the whole deal, Ruthie. If she's got days, I'll come this weekend. Call me if it's ours." And here is the thing that I could never make him understand. Then or ever. Call me if it's ours. As if a mother's dying were a delivery he could schedule around. As if love were a thing you could time to miss the traffic. "She's your mother," I said. "And you're handling it beautifully," he said, "which is exactly why I don't have to. I'll come this weekend." And he hung up, and he did not come that weekend either, and his mother did not die that night. She held on 8 more months, and he missed almost every one of them for the Atlanta people, and the site inspections, and Desiree. I sat with her instead. Somebody has to sit with the dying. It is the last kindness, and it is the one nobody wants to schedule. There came a point where even I could not do it all alone. Her nights got bad, and a body needs sleep to keep giving care, and I was wearing down to the bone. The doctor said she needed a night nurse, someone to sit with her from evening to morning so I could rest and come back strong. A night nurse cost money, real money, week after week. And so I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to my husband. Picture this with me, because I have played it over in my mind more times than I can count. I found him in his home office, on the phone, and I waited until he was done, and I told him his mother needed a night nurse, and told him what it cost. He did not even look up from his computer. "How much?" he said. I told him again what a week of nights would run. He whistled low, and shook his head, and finally looked at me. "That's a waste of good money, Ruthie. You're talking about paying a stranger to sit in a chair and watch a person sleep. That's all a night nurse does. She's got you. What in the world do we need to pay somebody for what you're already doing for free?" "Because I am tired, Cornelius," I said, and my voice cracked on it, which I hated. "I have been doing this 2 years by myself. I am 60 years old. I need to sleep sometimes, or I will go down before she does." "Then sleep," he said, going back to his screen. "Nobody's stopping you. Put a baby monitor in her room and go to bed." "A baby monitor," I repeated. "They're $20, he said. "That's your night nurse." Problem solved. He was proud of himself for it, I could see it. He thought he had solved a problem with $20 and a smart idea, same as he solved everything, and he went back to his development. And every dollar in that house was spoken for, except the ones I could spare, and I could not spare a nurse. His own mother, dying by inches on Sweetwater Road, was a line item he was not willing to fund. So I ran the sum in my head, standing in his office doorway, and I already knew what I was going to do before I left the room. So I sold the van. I sold Ruthie's table, the Robin's Egg van with my own name in gold on the side, the first thing I ever owned outright. And I used the money to pay a night nurse for his mother, for as long as she had left. I did not tell him. He never noticed the van was gone. He thought I had just stopped catering because I was busy playing nurse. A man who does not ask, does not see. Odessa said that to me more than once, and it turned out to be the truest thing anybody ever told me about the man I married. Now, here is the part I did not understand at the time. The part the whole story turns on, and I mean to tell it to you exactly as it happened to me, which means I will be telling it to you not understanding it, because that is the truth of how I lived it. About a year before Odessa passed, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, there was a man at the house when I arrived. A quiet man, 70-something, wearing a neat gray suit with a leather folder and a little machine on the kitchen table. Odessa introduced him as Harold Green, an old friend. "We're just doing some paperwork, baby," she told me. "Medicare and such. You know how they are. Would you fix us some coffee and then give us the room a little while?" I fixed the coffee. I remember Harold Green thanked me kindly and said the coffee was better than his late wife's, God rest her, and then I left them to their paperwork and went to change the linens. Through the door I could hear the low murmur of the two of them talking, and once I heard that little machine make a sound, a soft mechanical click, and once I heard Odessa's voice say, clear as anything, "Read that part back to me, Harold. I want it right." I thought nothing of it. Medicare paperwork. Old people and their forms. I was one step behind. I was always one step behind. That quiet Tuesday, that leather folder, that little clicking machine on the kitchen table where I had fed her collards 100 times, that was the whole prize, and I never once suspected it. The audience always knows before the woman does. You know right now, don't you? Sitting there, what Odessa Carter and Harold Green were doing at that kitchen table. It stayed hidden from me for 9 more years. Hold that. It is the sweetest kind of ache, knowing a thing the person you love does not yet know is coming to save her. Mother Odessa passed on a Sunday morning in the spring, with my hand in hers and his eye is on the sparrow, the last thing she heard, because I sang it to her right up until she wasn't there anymore. Her last clear words to me, the day before, were these: "You did right by me, Ruthie Bell. Now you let God do right by you. It's already done. It's already written down. You just have to hold on long enough to let it be read." I thought she was talking about heaven. I told her I would see her there. It never occurred to me she was talking about a folder in Harold Green's office and a record down at the county courthouse. I kissed her forehead, and I closed her eyes, and I sang the last verse to an empty room. Cornelius made it to the funeral. He gave a beautiful eulogy about his mother, about her strength, about how she had raised him to reach for the next big thing and never stop climbing. He did not mention that his wife had bathed her and fed her and sung to her in the dead of night for 3 years. He did not mention the night nurse or the van. He stood at that pulpit, my handsome husband, and he made his own mother's death about his own climbing. And the whole church said what a devoted son. I sat in the second pew with the taste of collards and hymns in my mouth, and I said nothing, because his mother had taught me that God keeps receipts, and I had decided, standing at her grave, that I would trust her about that same as I had trusted her about everything else. I need to tell you now how the marriage went in the years after Odessa passed, because you must see how low a woman can be brought before you can understand how it feels to be lifted. And I will not hide any of it from you, so this next part is hard for me. After his mother was gone, my husband stopped pretending. The Desiree I had refused to see became a Desiree I could no longer avoid seeing, because she was at the office every day and at the dinners and, eventually, in my own home, being introduced as his business partner, while she looked at me with the pity you show a piece of furniture that is about to be reupholstered. She was 34 years old. She had a way of touching his arm when she laughed that told me everything, and a way of looking at our house like she was measuring it for curtains. The development deal was the biggest of my husband's life. A whole lakefront parcel out on Lake Lanier, condominiums and a marina. The thing he said would finally put his name on the skyline for good. He talked about it constantly. He borrowed against everything to fund it, and note this piece that would matter so much later. The piece he never once questioned. The collateral he borrowed against, the assets the bank counted, included the family place on Sweetwater Road and the little cottage his family had always kept up at the lake. His mother's house. His mother's cottage. He pledged them to the bank like they were his to pledge, and it never crossed his mind to check, because he was Cornelius Carter, a self-made man, and everything with his name on it was his. He was so sure of that. It is a terrible thing to watch a man be so sure of a thing that is not true. I need to tell you about the months before the party, because a public humiliation like the one under that arch does not come out of nowhere. It is built, brick by brick, and my husband laid every brick himself in the months leading up to it, and I watched him do it, and I still did not let myself believe where it was headed. It started with the money. One morning I went to the bank to buy groceries and pay the church its tithe, and my card would not work. I stood at the counter, and the young teller looked at her screen and got that careful, pitying look young people get when they are about to tell an older woman something embarrassing. "Ma'am," she said, "it looks like this account has been restructured. You've been removed as a joint holder. There's a sub-account here with your name on it, but the available balance is only $61.40. That number, 40 years of marriage, 40 years of catering money and payroll I made and books I kept, and my husband had moved it all into accounts I could not touch and left me that pocket change like a tip. I did not make a scene at the bank. I bought what that little bit would buy, and I drove home, and I found him in the kitchen. "Cornelius," I said, setting down the little bag of groceries, "my card wouldn't work. The bank says I've been taken off our accounts." He did not even pretend to be surprised. "That's right," he said, pouring his coffee. "My accountant's advice. There's some legal restructuring happening with the development, and it's cleaner if the personal accounts are in one name. It's temporary." "Temporary," I said. "You left me $61, Cornelius. How am I supposed to buy food? Pay for my medications?" "You'll manage," he said. "You always manage. That's your gift, Ruthie." And he took his coffee into his office and shut the door. And I stood in the kitchen with $61.40 to my name, and I finally let myself see the shape of what was coming. My mother's voice came back to me across all those years, at the punch bowl. "Keep one thing that is yours. A little money, a little kitchen, a little something that is yours." I had sold my something. I had sold my Robin's egg van to keep a nurse at her side through the nights, the very woman whose son had just left me $61, and I sank down at my own kitchen table, and for the first time in 40 years I was truly afraid. But hear this about being brought to $61. It clears your eyes. I stopped hoping that afternoon, and a woman who has stopped hoping starts, at last, to see. The next thing was the bedroom. I came home from Wednesday night Bible study one evening to find the master bedroom torn apart. My things, my clothes, my mother's quilt, the little cross that hung over the bed, all of it boxed up and stacked in the hall, and painters in the room, and swatches of fabric laid out on the bare mattress. And there, directing it all with a clipboard, was Desiree. "Oh," she said, when she saw me, not one bit embarrassed. "Ruthie, we're just freshening the space." Cornelius asked me to. The old palette was she waved her hand, very dated. "You understand. I've moved your things to the guest room for now. I hope that's all right." "You've moved my things," I repeated. "Just for now," she said, with a smile that had no warmth in it at all. "While we sort everything out. And hear what I did. Because I am not a saint, and I will not pretend to be one." I looked at that young woman standing in my bedroom with a clipboard, and I felt something rise up in me that I had to swallow down hard. And then I heard Odessa's voice, plain as anything. "Keep those hands kind. Let me keep the books." So I did not say the thing that was on my tongue. I picked up the box with my mother's quilt in it, and I carried it to the guest room myself, and I made up the guest bed, and I slept in it that night, and I prayed for the strength not to hate a 34-year-old woman for being exactly what my husband had made room for. It is the hardest prayer I ever prayed, and I am not sure to this day that God fully answered it. But I kept my hands kind. That was the part I could control. The vow renewal was Desiree's idea, though nobody had told me that either at the time. I thought it was Cornelius trying, in his clumsy way, to make things right between us. 4 decades married, a big party, a renewal of our vows under a garden arch at the house, with 180 of our people and the church choir in gold tablecloths. He planned it for a full year. He hired a coordinator. He invited every investor in the lakefront deal, every banker, every business associate, the mayor, the pastor, everyone. And I let myself believe, God help me, I let myself believe that my husband wanted to stand up in front of the world and say he chose me all over again. That is how much a woman can want to be chosen. I ironed my ivory dress the night before, and I prayed over it, and I thanked God for softening my husband's heart. What I failed to see was that the party was not for me. The party was a showpiece. It was Cornelius Carter presenting himself to his investors as a solid family man on the eve of the biggest closing of his life, and it was the stage he had chosen to get rid of me on, publicly and permanently, so that everyone would see the divorce as a strong man trading up rather than a coward abandoning the woman who built him. Desiree had helped him plan the very party at which he would replace me. I was expected to smile. It was, though I had no word for it then, it was contractual. He had even had his lawyer word it that way. I was expected to attend, and to smile, and to leave quietly with what he decided to give me, which was nothing. Before the party, there were 3 more blows, and I have to tell them to you, because each one is a brick in the wall, and because in 2 of them my husband handed me, without knowing it, the very rope he would hang himself with. The first blow was my son. Darnell came to see me about 2 weeks before the renewal, and I was so glad to see my boy that I did not read his face right away. He sat at my kitchen table, the guest room kitchen table now, and he turned his coffee cup around and would not look at me, and finally he said it. "Mama, Dad's cutting me in on the lakefront deal. 10%. Do you know what 10% of that project is worth?" "I'm happy for you, baby," I said, and I meant it, before I understood. "There's a condition," he said, still turning the cup. "He needs the family unified before the investors. He needs everybody on the same page, including at the renewal." He finally looked up, and his eyes were miserable. "He needs you to not fight the divorce, to sign what he puts in front of you, quiet, and let the party go smooth. And if the family looks unified, I get my 10%. If it turns into a war, the deal gets shaky, and he pulls the offer." I sat there and I looked at my only child, 38 years old, and I understood that my husband had just bought my son's silence with a 10th share of a dream, and that my son was sitting at my table asking me to agree to my own erasure so he could have it. "So you're asking me," I said slow, "to help him throw me out quietly, so you can have your 10%. "It's not like that, Mama," he said, but his face said it was exactly like that. It's a lot of money. It's my whole future, and you're going to be fine. Dad said he'd take care of you. And fighting it just hurts everybody. Your grandmother's future was a lot of money too," I said, and I sat with her at 3 o'clock in the morning for it, and never once asked her what my 10% was. I stood up and I took his cup, still full, to the sink. "You go on home, Darnell, and you tell your father I heard him. I understand him perfectly. I've never understood him more clearly in my life." My son left, and I held the tears until his car was out of the drive, and then I cried like something had died. Because something had. But I did not change my mind, and I would not chase him down the walk, because there are walks a person has to take on their own 2 feet. The second blow came 4 days later, and this one my husband delivered himself, sitting across from that same kitchen table with a folder and a lawyer's smile. "I'm going to be reasonable," Cornelius said, sliding a document across to me. "More reasonable than I have to be. This is a quitclaim deed. You sign it, you give up any claim to the house and the lake place, and in exchange I'll give you $50,000. Cash, to start over. That's more than fair for a woman leaving a marriage with nothing to her name. And if I don't sign it?" His smile did not change, but his eyes did. "You've got 30 days, he said. 30 days to sign, and then the offer's gone, and you walk away with what the court gives a woman who contributed nothing but casseroles for 40 years, which is a whole lot less than 50,000. I'm doing you a kindness, Ruthie. I'd advise you to take it. $50,000 and a 30-day clock." I looked at that document a long moment, I had no idea, sitting there, that I owned the house he was trying to buy me out of. I had no notion the lake place was already mine, recorded and legal, 9 years running. I only knew, in my spirit, that Odessa had told me to be patient, and that a woman does not sign away her name for $50,000 and a 30-day threat, no matter how afraid she is. So I slid it back across the table. "I'm not going to sign this today, Cornelius," I said. "You've got 30 days, he said, standing up, buttoning his jacket, pleased, because he thought a scared woman with $61 would cave inside a week. Clock's running, and that was the piece he did not know. The thing that makes me want to laugh and weep at the same time even now. He set that clock running, and it ran right up to the party, and it never once occurred to him that the reason I would not sign was not stubbornness. It was that his mother had already signed everything to me 9 years before, and the document he was waving in my face was, in the eyes of the law, worth exactly nothing. He was offering to buy me a house I already owned. The third blow was the worst, because it was the most public, and it gave me my first taste of what he was willing to do to me in front of God and everybody. 2 Sundays before the renewal, I came down the steps of Mount Pleasant after service, in my good church dress, shaking hands with the pastor, and a young man in a polo shirt stepped up to me on the church steps and said, "Ruthie Bell Carter?" And when I said yes, he pressed an envelope into my hands and said, "You've been served," and walked away. Divorce papers. On the church steps. In front of my whole congregation. My husband had hired a man to serve me divorce papers on the steps of the church where I had worshipped for 30 years, because he wanted me softened and shamed before the party, and he could not have cared less who saw. The pastor put his arm around me right there on the steps. "Ruthie," he said, "lo, whatever this is, you are not alone in it." "You hear me?" "I hear you, Pastor," I said. And do you know, standing on those steps with a divorce petition in my hand and my whole church watching, I felt the strangest thing. I felt Odessa. I felt her so strong it was like she had her arm around my other side. "Be patient, baby. It's already written down." And I lifted my chin. And I folded that envelope. And I went to Wednesday night Bible study 3 days later, and I led the lesson I had planned. On the book of Ruth, on a widow who had nothing, and was faithful anyway, and was lifted up in the end by a kinsman redeemer who paid the price no one thought would ever be paid. 40 women were in that room. The pastor was there. It is written in the church bulletin. Remember that Wednesday. It is going to matter more than any of us in that room could have dreamed. Now, there was one more thing that came to the house in those weeks, and it was the one piece the whole reversal turns on, so mind it close. A certified letter arrived, signature required, from a title company, and I signed for it, and I carried it in to my husband where he sat in his office, because it had his name on it, and I never opened other people's mail. "What's this?" he said, tearing it open, scanning it. And I watched his face, and for 1 second, 1 single second, something flickered across it that might have been worry. The letter was from the title company doing its work on the lakefront loan, and it spoke of a recorded encumbrance predating the marriage partition, and it asked him to contact them about a prior recorded interest in the Sweetwater and Lanier properties. I could not make sense of a word of it. Neither, it turned out, did he, because he did not read it twice. He read it once, and he decided it was a clerical mistake, a title company being overcautious, some clerk's error that his lawyer would clear up in an afternoon. "Junk," he pronounced, balling it up and pitching it in the trash can beside his desk. "These title people jump at their own shadow. Everything's mine, free and clear. Always has been." and he went back to his screen. That was the letter that would cost him everything, but not yet. I fished it out of the trash later, not knowing why, only that I could not stand to see mail thrown away. And I smoothed it flat and put it in the drawer where I kept things I could not explain, but could not throw away. It would sit there, that little balled-up warning, until the night it stood up at a party and spoke. Now let me take you back to that arch, because that is where we started, and you have waited long enough to see the rest of it. 180 of them, gold tablecloths catching the late afternoon light. The choir from Mount Pleasant standing in their wine, colored robes off to the side, ready to sing the old sparrow hymn I had picked, the very one I had sung to his mother 1,000 nights. The pastor waiting with his little book. My son up front at the family table, Darnell, 38 years old, in a suit I had helped him pick out, not meeting my eyes, and me under the arch in my ivory dress, my hands folded, waiting to hear my husband say he chose me. He tapped the microphone twice. The crowd went quiet. And then, instead of vows, he pulled a folded stack of papers from inside his jacket, and he pressed them into my palms, and he said the words, "I will hear until the day I die." "Everybody," Cornelius said, smiling out at the crowd, "before we get to the toasts, I've got an announcement. Life is short, and a man has got to speak plain about where his heart is." He reached out his hand, and Desiree came up out of the second row in a red dress and took it and stood beside him. This is Desiree. Some of you know her from the business. She's going to be the next Mrs. Carter. A gasp went through the crowd like wind through wheat. And then he turned to me, and he lowered his voice just enough that it felt intimate, and just loud enough that the microphone caught every word. "Ruthie, those are divorce papers. Everything out there has my name on it. The house, the company, the lake place, all of it. You'll leave with nothing. Same as when I found you. Don't make a scene. You were always good at not making a scene. Do that one last thing for me. I want to tell you what I did in that moment, and I want you to remember it, because it is the whole of who I am. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw the papers in his face, though the Lord knows a lesser sin has been forgiven a better woman. I looked down at the papers in my hands, and then I looked up at my son, who would not look at me, and then I looked out at a sea of faces, near 200 of them, that were all staring at me and none of them moving to help. And Odessa's voice came to me in my head, as clear as if she were standing at my shoulder. God keeps receipts, baby. You just have to be patient enough to let it all be read. And so I did the only thing that woman ever taught me to do. I folded the papers back up, and I held them against my chest, and I said, in a voice that did not shake, "All right, Cornelius, if that's what you want. I won't make a scene." And I stepped back from the arch, and I went and I sat down in an empty chair at table 2, next to a quiet old man in a gray suit, who I had not looked at closely until that exact moment. It was Harold Green, 9 years older, a little more stooped, but the same kind eyes, and on the floor beside his chair was a sealed carton, and his hand was resting on top of it, and he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on a man's face before. It was the expression of somebody who has been waiting 9 years for a bell to ring, and has just heard it ring. "Mrs. Carter," he said to me, very quietly under the noise of the crowd. "Do you remember me? You liked my coffee," I said. "You said it was better than your late wife's, God rest her." The old man's eyes filled up. "It was," he said. "It surely was." And then he looked at the divorce papers pressed against my chest, and he looked at my husband up at the arch with his young woman on his arm, and something came into Harold Green's face that was not sorrow anymore. "Ruthie," he said, "Odessa told me a day like this might come. She told me you wouldn't understand until it did. Will you trust an old man for the next 10 minutes?" I did not know what he meant. But I had trusted his coffee drinking, and I had trusted his kind eyes for one afternoon all those years back. And I had nothing left to lose that had not already been announced into a microphone. "Yes," I said, "I'll trust you." He patted my hand once. Then Harold Green stood up from his chair at table 2, and he tapped his water glass with a spoon until the room turned to look at him. And he said, in a voice that was old, but did not shake any more than mine had, "Before there are any toasts tonight, and before anybody signs anything, there is a document that the late Odessa Carter instructed me to read aloud, in full, in front of witnesses, on the day her son ever forgot who stood beside him. I believe today is that day. I am Harold Green. I was Odessa Carter's attorney and her friend for 50 years, and I would ask everyone, including you, Cornelius, to sit down and listen, because this concerns every person in this room, and it concerns the ground you are all standing on. You could have heard a pin drop on that grass." Cornelius laughed, but it was not his easy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has felt the first crack under the ice. "Harold, this is a party, not a probate hearing. Whatever it is can wait till Monday." "It has waited 9 years," Harold Green said. "It will not wait one more minute." "Sit down, son," your mother asked me to. And I never once told your mother no. And I watched my husband, in front of a crowd of the most important people he knew, decide he could not afford to look like the man who wouldn't let his own dead mother speak. He sat down. Desiree sat down next to him. And Harold Green opened that carton. The first thing he took out was a small recorder, the same little machine I had heard click on that quiet Tuesday 9 years before. "Odessa asked me to play this first," he said, "so that you would know these are her words and her wishes, made when her mind was sound, which 2 doctors and I will all attest that it was." He pressed a button, and through that little speaker, out over that whole crowd, and a garden arch and a choir in wine-colored robes, came the voice of Mother Odessa Carter, dead 9 years, clear as a Sunday morning. "If Harold is playing this for you," her voice said, "then my son has done the thing I prayed he would never do, and this is me reaching back from wherever I am to set it right. Cornelius, baby, I loved you. But I raised you wrong in one way. I taught you to reach for the next thing, and I never taught you to hold on to the thing you already had. So I am going to teach you now, the hard way, which is the only way you ever learned anything." A ripple went through the crowd. My husband had gone the color of ash. "Ruthie Bell," the voice went on, softer now. "Baby, if you are hearing this, then you have been hurt, and I am sorry I could not spare you the hurt, only the ruin. You had kind hands. You were the only one. So everything I had, I gave to you, the daughter God gave me, because you are the one who stayed." Harold Green switched off the recorder. And then he opened the leather folder, the same folder from that Tuesday, and he began to read. He read the will first. In the will, Odessa Carter left the house on Sweetwater Road, the very house whose garden we were all standing in, not to her son, but to me. He read it slow and clear, the legal words and then the plain ones, so that all those people understood it at the same moment my husband did. Then he read out the Odessa Carter Living Trust, recorded down at the county courthouse 9 years before, on a date he read aloud twice so no one could mistake it. The trust held the house. It held the little cottage out on Lake Lanier, and it held a brokerage account that Odessa had built quietly over 40 years of pinching and saving and investing the money from a life of hard work. An account that Harold Green read, in a steady voice, currently held $740,000. All of it, in trust. For me. None of these three assets, Harold Green said, lowering the folder and looking directly at my husband, the Sweetwater house, the Lanier cottage, or the account. None of them has been the property of Cornelius Carter for one single day in the last 9 years. They were placed in an irrevocable trust for Ruthie Bell Carter, recorded and legal, long before any divorce, long before any development loan. They were never his to pledge. They were never his to give away. And they were most certainly never his to take. The silence broke then, but not into noise. It broke into a kind of stunned rustling, the whole crowd turning to look at one another, and then turning to look at the investors at table 1, the bankers, the men who had lent my husband millions of dollars against a house and a cottage that had never belonged to him. Cornelius was on his feet. That's not possible, he said. That's a lie. My mother left everything to me. I'm her son. I'm her only son. This is some kind of scam. He turned to the crowd, to the investors, hands out, pleading, everybody. This is a confused old man and a bitter woman, that's all this is. The house is collateral on my loan. I pledged it. The bank has papers, signed papers. You pledged it, Harold Green agreed, mild as milk. That is precisely the problem, son. You pledged a house that was not yours to pledge. Would you like me to read the recording date at the county again? I would be glad to. It is 9 years old. Your loan is 18 months old. The mathematics are not kind to you. There's a mistake in your papers, old man, Cornelius said, and his voice was climbing now. My lawyers will bury you. This is defamation in front of witnesses, and you'll what? Harold Green said, and for the first time the old man's voice had an edge on it. Sue a dead woman's estate? Sue the county recorder? Sue the state of Georgia? He shook his head slowly. Sit down, Cornelius. You are only making it worse, and there are a great many important people watching you make it worse. But my husband could not sit down. A drowning man does not sit down. I have a quitclaim, he said, and he was scrambling now, pulling at his jacket. Ruthie signed a quitclaim. She gave it all up. It's right here, it's signed, it's notarized, I have it right here. And he actually pulled it out of his jacket, a folded document, and waved it over his head like a winning ticket, and this was his last and biggest mistake. Because Harold Green reached out one steady old hand and said, "May I see that, son?" He should not have handed it over, but all those guests were watching, and to refuse would have looked like a guilty man refusing, so he handed it over. And Harold Green held it up to the light and looked at it a long moment, and then he said the words that ended my husband. "This quitclaim," he said, "is notarized. It carries a notary's seal and a date. According to this seal, Ruthie Bell Carter appeared before a notary and signed away her interest in these properties on a Wednesday this past March." He looked up. "Ruthie, where were you on the evening of that Wednesday?" And I stood up in my ivory dress, and I said, in a clear voice, I was at Wednesday night Bible study at Mount Pleasant, Mr. Green, same as every Wednesday for 30 years. I was leading it. There were 40 women in that room with me, and the pastor, and it is written down in the church bulletin, because I gave the lesson that night on the book of Ruth. A sound moved across the crowd. I have never in my life sat in front of that notary. I have never signed that paper. I did not know that paper existed until you are holding it up right now. The notary, Harold Green said, still looking at the seal, is a woman named on this stamp, and I happen to know, because I make it my business to know, that she is the first cousin of a Miss Desiree, who I believe was introduced to us all a few minutes ago as the next Mrs. Carter. He set the quitclaim down flat on the table, gently, like you set down something dangerous. This document is a forgery. It is a felony. And there are near 200 living witnesses to the fact that the woman it claims signed it was, at that hour, teaching scripture in front of her whole congregation. I will be walking this over to the district attorney myself on Monday morning. Now watch what happened next, because this is the part where a whole life's worth of a man's choices came due all at once, in the space of about 10 minutes, in front of everyone whose opinion he had ever cared about. The bankers at table 1 stood up first. I watched them lean their heads together, 3 men in good suits, and I watched one of them take out his phone, and I understood. Even not being a businesswoman, exactly what was happening. The lakefront development loan was secured by collateral that had just been revealed, before all those witnesses, to have never belonged to the borrower. The whole deal, the marina, the condominiums, the name up on the skyline, all of it rested on a home and a lake place my husband did not own, and had never owned. The lead banker, a heavy-set man who had toasted my husband at 3 dinners I had cooked for, stood up and buttoned his jacket, not bothering to lower his voice. "Cornelius," he said, "is the collateral on our loan clean or is it not clean? Answer me straight, in front of these people, right now." And my husband opened his mouth, and nothing came out, because there was no straight answer that saved him, and a man who cannot answer that question has already answered it. "That's what I thought," the banker said. He looked at the other 2 men from the bank, and he gave a small nod, and the 3 of them gathered their things. Passing my husband, the banker paused just long enough to say, "You'll hear from our counsel Monday. Do not call me before then. Do not call me after, either." And they walked out across the grass to the valet stand, 3 men in good suits. And they did not look back, and the biggest deal of Cornelius Carter's life died on his own lawn, while the choir stood there in their robes, not knowing whether to sing. Then Desiree stood up, and I will give the young woman this much credit. She understood arithmetic faster than any woman I ever met. She had done a calculation the moment Harold Green read out that the house and the cottage and the $740,000 belonged to me. And she had done another one when the bankers walked out. And by the time the second calculation was finished, the man she had planned to marry was worth exactly nothing and was very possibly about to be a defendant. She did not scream at him. She did not even look at him with anger. She looked at him with the flat, closed face of a woman closing an account. "Desiree," my husband said, reaching for her arm. "Sit down. This is nothing. This is temporary. We'll fix it Monday. Baby, sit down." "Don't," she said, stepping back out of his reach, and her voice was cool as the far side of a pillow. "Just don't. There's no ring on my hand, Cornelius. There's no paper carrying my name. I am not going to be a defendant's fiancé. I'm not going to prison for your mother's kitchen table." She looked around at the wreckage of the party, at the untouched cake, at the 200 eyes on her, and she smoothed her red dress. "I think I'd better go." And she went. She walked out through the caterers, past the trays of little crab cakes and the untouched cake with our names on it in gold icing, and she got in her long car and she drove away. And my husband never saw her again except across a courtroom. And then last of all, my eyes went to my son, Darnell, who had sat there at the head table looking at his plate while his father handed his mother divorce papers. My son had made his own calculation months before, when his father had offered him a 10% stake in the lakefront development in exchange for standing with him and against me. 10% of a marina and a name on the skyline. My son had chosen 10% of his father's dream over his mother's face. And now the dream was dead on the lawn, and his 10% of nothing was nothing. And he sat there, and he finally lifted his eyes and looked at me. And I said not one word to him. I just looked back. There would be time for Darnell later, and none of it would be quick or easy, and I will tell you about it before we are through. My husband was still standing. He had gone from ash to something worse, a gray that had a green in it, and he was holding the microphone, and he did the last desperate thing a proud man does, which is he tried to talk his way out of the ocean he was drowning in. "Ruthie," he said. And his voice, his big, confident voice that had won 1,000 contracts, cracked straight down the middle on the second syllable of my name. "Ruthie, baby, we can work this out. This has all been a misunderstanding. Harold, put that away. Ruthie, come here. Come stand by me. We don't need lawyers. We're family. Tell them we're family." And here is where a lesser story would have me deliver a speech. Here is where the movies would have me tell him off, list his sins, make the room applaud. I did not do that. His mother did not raise me to gloat, and the truth is I did not need to say a single word. Because Harold Green and a county deed record and 40 women at a Wednesday Bible study had already said everything that needed saying, better than I ever could. The system said it. The documents said it. The ledger said it. I only had to stand still in that ivory dress and let it be read. So all I said to my husband, the only thing I said to him on that lawn in front of that whole crowd, was this. I set the divorce papers down on the little table beside me, and I smoothed them flat with my kind hands, and I said, "You know what, Cornelius? I'll sign these. I'd be glad to, because your mother already gave me everything I'll ever need, and it turns out the one thing I get to keep, the one thing you could never take, is the right to walk away from you. So thank you. You've set me free, and you did it in front of everybody, exactly how you like to do things. Go on and finish your party." And I picked up my church pocketbook, and I took Harold Green's arm, and the two of us walked across that grass, past the silent choir, past the untouched cake, and I never looked back. Behind me I heard my husband saying my name into a dead microphone that nobody had thought to turn off, so that the last thing all those guests heard as I walked away was Cornelius Carter saying Ruthie over and over to a woman who was already gone. Harold Green walked me clear out to my car, his old hand steady under my elbow, and when we got there he stopped and turned to me. "She made me promise," he said, 9 years ago, at that kitchen table over your coffee. She said, "Harold, that girl won't understand what we're doing, and I don't want her to, because if she knows she's protected, she might stop being afraid of him too soon. And one who stops being afraid too soon does something rash and gives the whole game away." She said, You wait. You wait until he shows the whole world who he is, and then you stand up and you read it." Not 1 minute before, the old man's eyes were wet. "I have carried this carton in the trunk of my car to every family event for 9 years, Ruthie. 9 years. I have sat through Thanksgivings and Easters and one other party with that carton in my trunk, praying I'd never have to open it. And tonight I finally got to open it." He shook his head. She knew her son. God help her, she knew him better than he knew himself. She was the smartest woman I ever drew a paper for, and I drew papers for 50 years. Why didn't she just leave it all to him and trust him? I asked. He was her son. "Because she loved you more," Harold Green said simply. "And because she said a mother's last job is to protect the one who will be left holding the empty room." That was you. She said it would always be you. He opened my car door for me. Go home, Ruthie, you're home. Sweetwater Road is yours tonight, and it was yours 9 years ago, and no man on this lawn can say otherwise. I'll call you Monday about the district attorney. And he closed my door, gentle, and stood in the drive in that gray church suit, and watched until I was out of sight. An old man who had kept a dead woman's promise for 9 years, and finally, that night, gotten to set it down. Now, I told you this would not be quick, and it would not be easy. And it was not. The weeks after that night were their own kind of hard. There is a loneliness that comes even in vindication, maybe especially in vindication, and I felt it. I moved back into the home on Sweetwater Road, my house now, legally and truly, and I walked through those rooms where I had bathed and fed and sung to his mother, and the quiet of it was enormous. I would find myself setting 2 coffee cups out of habit. I would catch myself listening for a hymn I used to sing to her in the deep of the night. But I owe you the truth about the other thing I felt, because it would be a lie to leave it out. Underneath the loneliness, there was a peace I had not known in 40 years. For 40 years I had held a string I did not fully understand, kept a silence I could not fully explain, trusted a woman's saying about a ledger I could not see. And it had all come true. Every bit of it. God had kept the receipts, exactly like Odessa said, and he had waited to present them until the whole room was watching, exactly the way it needed to happen for a woman who had been erased in public to be restored in public. There is a particular peace in learning that the thing your mother-in-law told you at your wedding, the thing you held on to for 40 years on nothing but faith, was true all along. The legal pieces fell like legal pieces do, which is slowly, and then all at once. The forgery referral that Harold Green walked into the district attorney's office that Monday morning became a real case. Desiree's cousin, the notary, lost her commission and pleaded to a charge to stay out of a cell. My husband was named in that case too, and while he was never made to serve time, the word fraud attached itself to his name in the business community like a smell soaks into a coat, permanently. So that no bank in the state of Georgia would lend Cornelius Carter $1 to develop a doghouse. The lakefront deal was gone. The company folded within the year, because a development company with no credit and no collateral and a founder under a fraud cloud is not a company, it is a letterhead. Everything bearing his name, it turned out, had been built on a foundation that was never his. And when the foundation was revealed to belong to me, the whole thing came down. He had told me I would go out with nothing, just as I came. In the end, it was Cornelius Carter who left empty-handed, with nothing at all, and I say that with no joy. Though I will not pretend I say it with sorrow either. I say it plain, like reporting the weather. It rained. The deal died. The man who called his own dying mother a needless expense lost everything the day his mother's kindness was read aloud. Now I will speak of the certified letter, because I promised you it would matter, and I do not leave promises unkept. Do you remember, back before the party, I told you a certified letter came to the house from a title company about a recorded encumbrance predating the marriage partition? That letter came weeks before the vow renewal. It was the title company doing its due diligence on the lakefront loan, and in doing it, they had found the recorded trust over at the county, the very trust Odessa filed 9 years before, and they had sent my husband a formal notice that there was a recorded interest on the Sweetwater and Lanier properties that predated any claim of his. It was the whole thing, spelled out in a letter, delivered to his own hands, weeks before he ever stood under that arch. And he tossed it in the kitchen trash unread. I watched him do it. I fished it out later, not understanding it, and I tucked it in a drawer. the same drawer where I had once folded a newspaper that called him self-made. He had been warned. The truth had come knocking on his own front door, certified, signature required, and he had thrown it away because he could not imagine a world in which anything with the name Carter on it was not his. That letter would have saved him. If he had opened it, if he had made one phone call, he would have canceled the party, quietly unwound the loan, and lived out his days a diminished but not a destroyed man. He threw it in the trash. That was the letter that cost him everything. His own mother never destroyed him. Desiree never destroyed him. I most certainly never destroyed him. Cornelius Carter was destroyed by his own certainty that he already knew everything worth knowing, and the proof of it sat unread in his own trash can for 3 weeks. Now I will speak of my son, because a story about a mother is not finished until the son comes home, or doesn't. Darnell did not come to me for a long time. I think shame is heavier than grief, and my son was carrying the full weight of what he had done, sitting at that head table for a slice of a dead dream, eyes down on his plate while his father tried to throw his mother out before the whole world. Pride kept him away first, and then when the pride wore off, shame kept him away. And shame is more patient than pride. It was near about 4 months later, on an evening in the early fall, that I heard a car in the drive at Sweetwater Road, and I looked out the window, and it was my son. He sat in that car in my driveway for the better part of an hour before he could make himself come to the door. I know because I sat in my kitchen and watched him, and I stayed where I was, because some walks a person has to make on their own 2 feet, or they do not count. When he finally knocked, I opened the door, and my grown son, 38 years old, stood on my porch and could not speak. His face just came apart. "Mama," he said, and then he could not say anything else for a while, and I let him not say it. He got himself together, and then it all came pouring out. "I sat there," he said. "I sat there and I stared at my plate. He offered me 10%, and I took his side and I sat there while he did that to you, in front of everybody, and I looked at my plate. What kind of man looks down at a plate while his mother gets thrown out in front of a whole crowd of people? What kind of son is that?" "A scared one," I said. "That's not an excuse." "No," I said, "it isn't. I didn't offer it as one. You asked me what kind, and I told you." Scared, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, the same gesture he made when he was 6 years old and had broken something. "I keep thinking about Grandma," he said. "You did all that for her. 3 years. And I couldn't do one thing for you. I couldn't even lift my head off a plate. He bought me, Mama. He bought me for 10% of a thing that turned out to be worth nothing. And the worst part, the part I can't get past, is I'd have done it cheaper. I'd have sold you out for less. That's what I can't live with. I could have said a great many things. I had 4 months of things I could have said, but I am Odessa Carter's daughter, the daughter God gave her. And she did not raise me to make a boy grovel on a porch." "Darnell," I said, "look at me. Your grandmother used to tell me God keeps receipts. You know what that means? It means the ledger goes both ways. It writes down the wrong you did, but it also writes down the day you drove out here and sat in your car for an hour, working up the nerve to knock. It writes down that you came back. Coming back counts. It doesn't erase the plate. But it counts, and it counts more than you think it does. How do you just forgive me? Like that?" I didn't say forgive, I told him. And I let him sit with that a second, because it was true, and he needed the truth more than he needed comfort. Forgiving's going to take a while, and it's going to take you showing me, not telling me. but I can open a door while I forgive. The two things aren't the same. Your grandmother taught me that too, at the end. She said you can love a person and still make them earn their way back to your table. So, and I opened my door the rest of the way. Come in the house, Darnell, I made too much supper. I always make too much. You'd think I'd learn. We did not fix it that night. You do not fix a thing like that in a night, and anybody who tells you different has never had it done to them. But he came in, and he ate at my table. And it was a beginning. It has been slow, and there are things between us that will take years, and there is a part of me, I will confess it to you honestly, that still sees him looking down at that plate. He started coming by on Sundays after that. At first he just ate and went home. Quiet, careful, a man walking on ice. But one Sunday he showed up early, before I had the greens on, and he tied on an apron without a word and started washing my collards in the sink. The same sink where I used to wash his grandmother's hair. You don't have to do that, I told him. I know I don't have to, he answered, keeping his eyes on the greens. That's the point, Mama. Grandma didn't have to have you. You didn't have to have her. That's the whole thing you and her were trying to teach me my whole life, and I was too busy chasing what Dad was chasing to hear it. He shook the water off a handful of collards. So, I'm going to wash the greens. Every Sunday, for as long as you'll let me. Not because I have to. Because I finally figured out what you meant. And I had to turn around to the stove so he would not see my face, and I stirred a pot that did not need stirring. And I said, well, you wash them good then. Your grandmother was particular about her greens. And that was as close as we came to saying it out loud, and it was enough. It is still enough. He washes the greens every Sunday, and slowly, one Sunday at a time, a son is earning his way back to a table he once looked down at. That is how it is supposed to work. You do not get the table back for free, but the door stays open while you earn it. He is my son, and I nursed his grandmother for 3 years to teach him. Without knowing, I was teaching him what a family is supposed to do for its own. He learned it late. But blood learns. I will tell you now what I did with the home and the cottage and all that money, because it matters, and because Odessa would want you to know. I kept the house. It is my home. It will always be my home. I kept the little lake cottage too, and I go out there now on Sunday afternoons and I sit on the porch, and I watch the water, and I sing hymns to nobody, and it is the closest thing to happiness I have known in years. But I did not keep all the money for myself. An old woman living alone does not need that kind of fortune, and Odessa did not build that account so I could sit on it. So, I did what I have always known how to do. The one thing I have ever truly known how to do. I feed people. I took a good part of that money and I built a kitchen. A real, proper commercial kitchen in the fellowship hall at Mount Pleasant with 6 stoves and 2 big ovens and a walk-in cooler. And every Wednesday and every Sunday we cook and we feed anybody who is hungry, no questions asked. No money taken, whether they thank you or not. Because my mother taught me that a fed person is a person who remembers you. And God taught me that a kindness done in the dark is never, ever wasted. There is a sign over the door of that kitchen. My name is not the one on it. Ruthie's table was a van I sold to pay a night nurse for a dying woman, and I do not need my name on anything anymore. The sign over the kitchen door says Odessa's table. Because she is the one who kept the receipts. She is the one who reached back from wherever she is and set it right. Every plate we serve in that kitchen, we serve in her name. The day we dedicated that kitchen, the pastor stood up in the fellowship hall in front of the whole congregation, and he asked me if I wanted to say a few words. I had not planned to. I am not a woman who plans to say words. But I got to my feet, and I gazed out at all those faces, some of the very same faces that had watched a man serve me a divorce petition on those church steps not so many months before, and I found that I did have something to say, after all. "Most of you know what happened to me," I said. "You were on those steps. You saw. And hear me now. I am not standing up here because I got a house and a cottage and an account. Those things are nice, and I thank God for them. But they are not why I am standing up here." I put my hand on the doorframe of that new kitchen. I am standing up here because a woman named Odessa Carter looked at me at a fish fry when I was 19 years old and said I had kind hands. And then she spent the last 3 years of her life teaching me that kindness is not weakness, and it is not foolishness, no matter how many times this world tells you it is. And she spent 9 years after her own death proving it to a whole party full of important people who had never once thought about it. So this kitchen is not named for me. I did nothing but show up. It is named for the woman who taught me that showing up is all of it. The pastor took my hand then, and he said, "Ruthie, would you offer the blessing over the first meal?" And I bowed my head, and I prayed, "Lord, you keep receipts." We know that now, all of us who watched. So we thank you for the ones who feed the hungry and get no credit, for the ones who sit up with the dying in the middle of the night, for the ones this world calls the help. Bless this food, and bless the hands that made it, and keep every one of those hands kind. In Jesus' name, amen. And 100 voices said amen with me, and we opened the doors, and we fed everybody who came, and we have not stopped since. There is a woman who comes to Odessa's table most Wednesdays. She is about my age. She does not say much. But one evening she stayed after to help me wash pans, and she told me, quiet, over the sink, that she had been caring for her own husband's mother for 6 years, and that nobody in her family had ever once thanked her for it, and that she had heard about my story and driven 40 minutes to eat at a kitchen named for a woman thanked at last, even if only after she was gone. "Does it get better?" she asked me. The invisible part. Does it ever get better? And I dried my hands, and I took her 2 hands in my 2 hands, same as Odessa took mine, and I raised them between us. "These are kind hands," I told her. "I can see it plain. And I am going to give you the same thing a wise woman gave me, and I need you to believe it even when you cannot see how it could be true. God keeps receipts. Every single one. You keep these hands kind, and you hold on, and one day, in His own time, and not yours, somebody is going to stand up and read yours back to a whole room of people who thought you were nothing." She cried. I let her cry. And then we finished the pans, and I sent her home with a plate. Now here is what I learned, and then I want to hear from you, because I sit with your comments like company in the evening. I learned that being overlooked is not the same as being powerless. For 3 years I was the invisible woman at Sweetwater Road, the one nobody photographed, the one whose name went in no newspaper, the one a busy man called a waste of his good money. And all that time I was holding, without knowing I held it, the very ground he was standing on. The quiet ones are not weak, friend. We are just waiting on a timing that is not our own. I learned that a kindness has no expiration date. The bath I gave a frightened woman at 3 in the morning, the hymn I sang her, the collards I fed her 1 forkful at a time, I did every bit of it, expecting no reward. And I want to be plain that I would do all of it again if there were no reward, if there were no folder, and no lawyer, and no account, because that is what you do for the woman who called your hands kind on the first day she met you. But it turned out there was a ledger after all, exactly like she said. And it came due at the exact hour I most needed it to, before the exact eyes that most needed to see it. What you scatter in the dark, you gather in the light. Sooner or later, in this life or the next. And I learned the hardest thing last, so I saved it for the end. I learned that a man who never asks what you think is a man who will never once see what you are worth, and that it is not your job to make him see it before God is ready to. For 40 years I thought that if I stayed useful enough and quiet enough and agreeable enough, my husband would one day look up and see me. He never did. He went to his ruin not seeing me, calling my name into a dead microphone as I walked away, still not understanding what he had lost, because a man who cannot see his own mother's kindness is never going to see his wife's. Do not spend 40 years, as I did, waiting for a man to see you who has decided you are furniture. You are not furniture. You are the tree he is standing in the shade of, and you do not need a lawyer or a folder or a will read aloud at a party to stand up straight in your own life and know it. I only needed those things because I waited too long to know it myself. Do not wait as long as I did. Here is my question for you, and I mean it with my whole heart. If you had been Ruthie, if you had held that secret you did not even fully understand for all those years, and been humiliated in front of all those guests, and then been handed back everything at once by a dead woman's kindness, would you have done what I did and let the son who abandoned you come back to your table 4 months later? Or would you have kept that door shut for good and let him sit alone with his plate, just as he let you stand alone under that arch? There is no wrong answer. I only want to know how your heart is built. Tell me down below. And tell me again while you're at it where you are watching from, and what time it is where you sit right now. Because it does this old woman's heart real good to know you are out there listening tonight. If you have made it this far into an old woman's story, then you already understand something the loud ones and the climbers never will. And I thank you for sitting with me at this table like family. Take a moment, if you would, and subscribe so that the next quiet woman who has been made to feel like the help in her own home can find her way here too, and hear that her patience was never weakness. I want to close by stepping out of the story for just a moment. One woman, to whoever you are out there listening. I told you this exactly as I lived it, because I have known too many women who held families together with both hands and were thanked by no one. Women who bathed the dying, who cooked the plates, who paid the bills nobody knew about, who were called too costly to keep in the very homes they were the foundation of. If you are one of those women tonight, hear me, and hear me good, because I spent 40 years not hearing it myself. Your quiet is not your weakness. Your kindness is not your foolishness. Your patience is not you being a fool who does not know her own worth. It is a seed planted in the dark, and seeds do not answer to the calendar of the people who stepped on them. And your day, when it comes, and it will come, will not need you to shout for it. The truth, when it finally stands up in a room full of witnesses, has a voice all its own. You only have to keep your hands kind and trust the one who taught you how, and be patient enough to let the ledger be read in its own good time. God kept his receipts. Odessa kept hers. And a wife who was told she would leave with nothing walked home to a house, a cottage, and a kitchen with a dead woman's name over the door. God bless you, and thank you for listening. And never, never once, as long as you live, mistake the quiet one in the room for the powerless one.